This week's topic is the classical era in music history, and that can be confusing because weren't we talking about classical music in other time periods? In fact, we talk a lot about classical music in this course. The confusion comes from two different uses of the word classical. A lot of the time when we use the word classical, we mean classical in a generic sense, with a lowercase c. This basically refers to music written without a drum set, especially the stuff written before the invention of jazz in the 20th century. But today we're talking about classical music with an uppercase C, and it refers to a very specific period of time and a very specific style of writing. As we know, the dates of these eras are somewhat fuzzy. Most people will say the classical era ran from the middle of the 18th century through the beginning of the 19th century, when composers like Beethoven and Schubert started experimenting with new ideas. To make it easy to remember, we can round the classical era to the half-century between 1750 and 1800. Sometimes music can be very dramatic and emotional, but in the classical era, restraint and elegance were often prioritized. Music was quite subtle. Maybe it was clever or humorous, but it was rarely heavy or overbearing. The elegance of classical era music was well articulated by short, balanced phrases. Often these phrases came in pairs, called periods, that sound almost like questions and answers. There are two composers you really should remember from the classical era, and you've probably heard the name of the first one, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Mozart was certainly a larger-than-life character, and there are such incredible stories surrounding him that it can be difficult to tell truth from fiction. For instance, it's hard to imagine that Mozart was actually on tour throughout Europe, playing for royalty and composing new music by age 6. However, this turns out to be true. Wolfgang's father, Leopold Mozart, recognized his son's talent and capitalized on it from a very young age. This kept Wolfgang from having anything resembling a normal or healthy childhood, and his relationship with his father, and everyone else, was strained because of it. The piece you're hearing now is the Miserere by Gregorio Allegri, and it was written during the Renaissance era. It was a prized secret of the Catholic Church. It was only permitted to be performed in the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, and the church musicians were not permitted to share the sheet music. You might ask then how we are watching a recording of it that clearly did not take place in the Sistine Chapel. The story goes that as a teenager Mozart visited the Vatican and attended Mass. After hearing Allegri's Miserere just once or twice, he went back to where he was staying and transcribed the entire piece from memory and wrote it down so that everyone could hear it. Such an action would not only have been next to impossibly difficult, but also in direct disobedience of the church and audacious to the point of recklessness. Again, this fantastical story turns out to be 100% true. In 1830, Alexander Pushkin wrote a poem about a feud between Mozart and his contemporary Antonio Salieri. This poem was turned into an opera by Rimsky-Korsakov in 1897, and then into a play by Peter Shaffer in 1979. That play was turned into a movie in 1984, which won 8 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Although Mozart and Salieri certainly knew each other, there was no actual rivalry between them as depicted in the movie. What the movie does get right, however, is the temperament of the characters. Remember, Mozart copied Allegri's Miserere even though it was supposed to be secret. This kind of disrespect for authority was very characteristic of Mozart.
This is yours.
Keep it, Majesty, if you want. It's already here in my head.
What? On one hearing only?
I think so, sire. Yes.
Show us.
The rest is just the same, isn't it? It doesn't really work, does it? Did you try? Shouldn't it be a bit more? Or this? This? Yes. Better? What do you think?
Despite his lack of social graces, the aristocracy did put up with Mozart to some degree because his music was so entertaining. He could do things within the classical era musical structures that no one else could. For instance, let's compare this piano concerto by Mozart with one written by Salieri. Both of these pieces are written in the same form, in the same key, in the same time period, and they follow the same patterns. I think, however, that the difference in creativity between the two composers is striking. So Mozart could turn the classical era patterns and forms into scintillating works of beauty that no one else could. But where did these patterns and forms come from? The answer is Joseph Haydn. Haydn was probably the most famous composer of the era, and he was the teacher of both Mozart and Beethoven. Many of his ideas are still popular today, and they certainly governed the composition of new music for the next 200 years. One of Haydn's most seminal developments was that of the symphony. The word sinfonia had previously been used to describe works for instruments without voices, but Haydn really codified what a symphony was, and that definition persists to this day. In Haydn's model, a symphony was a work for large ensemble, including strings, and usually woodwinds, and sometimes brass. It came in 4 movements. The first movement was fast, the second movement was slow, the third movement was based on a dance, and the last movement was a fast, exciting conclusion. The first movement was in a large form called sonata form, which was one of the most influential and important innovations in all of Western music history. Chamber music can mean any small group of musicians, fewer than about 20 or so players. But lacking further information, it's pretty safe to assume that chamber music refers to the string quartet. And who came up with the idea of the string quartet? That's right, it's Joseph Haydn again. He defined the string quartet as 2 violins, viola, and cello, and then he wrote an extensive repertoire for that ensemble, which really solidified its place in history. So Haydn was really the innovator of the classical era. He set up the constructs that everyone else, including Mozart, followed. Music in the classical style of the late 18th century tends to be elegant and restrained. It's highly structured, built of short phrases, often grouped in periods. Contrasts in volume, harmony, and timbre are limited. Chamber music was very popular during this period. Symphonies and other larger works feature relatively small orchestras and delicate instrumentation.